On the wall, remember, 2 sheets, blue sheet, yellow sheet, need to be on one of them. And we're going to start. We've got a couple of folks that's got to get out. Mr. Williams, you're first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I have 2 bills. Both are in the, on the blue sheet in the structured rules section. Senate Bill 410 is a bill that allows for the grading of our schools based on the waiver that was applied for and received, the accountability waiver. This just grades schools based on a number of indicators, a lot of which are student achievement, attendance, many other indicators, but the grade is a numerical grade of 0 to 100. It'll help us understand a little better whether a school is passing or not. And it also, you know, AYP was just kind of a, you made it or you didn't, but you really didn't know how successful the school was. This is something that Governor Bush did in Florida, was very successful, and appreciate your support for that bill, Senate Bill 410. The other bill we've seen before, we actually hope we can have the votes in the House to pass it this year, Senate Bill 362. This allows for the retrieval of the logs out of the rivers at 4 rivers in South Georgia that were put there by our ancestors many years ago.
Any questions, Mr. Williams? Thank you. Mr. Bethel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. On your yellow sheet on page 4, Senate Bill 430 is the revision to our state Senate district plan that was approved by the Justice Department following our special session. It impacts 7 districts. I appreciate Chairman Lane's support in getting it out of legislative and congressional reapportionment on a unanimous basis, and I appreciate the House's consideration of that bill.
Are there any questions, Mr. Bethel? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Kidd.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Resolution 1611.
Wait a second.
Hello.
Yeah.
House Resolution 1611, top of the page on the blue page. Simply a House resolution. A biofuel company in Alabama wants to come to Georgia and operate in 3 different locations, one of them being Baldwin County. And they just wanted the legislature to kind of halfway invite them over here, and that's all it is.
Any questions? Thank you. Mr. Castle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I ask you to consider Senate Bill 236, the very bottom of your first blue sheet. This is the bill allowing folks in a DUI court program or in a qualified rehabilitation program to get a limited driving permit to attend their treatment in after a 120-day suspension with approval of the trial judge, and only if you use an ignition interlock device. Appreciate your consideration of this bill.
Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Golden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm here with Senate Bill 402. It's the structured rule, deals alternative investments for ERS to try to strengthen that system. 402. It's in structured rule.
I noticed you brought your cohort with you this morning. He's had his teeth pulled yesterday, so he couldn't come be with you.
I tried to follow him per your instructions.
Any questions, Mr. Golden? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Wilkinson.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, on the blue sheet under modified open rules about halfway down, Senate Bill 357. This would repeal the Georgia Treaty Timber Act of 1973. This was a bill that was requested by the Department of Agriculture, and I'd like to ask for your favorable consideration.
Any questions? Thank you. Mr. Stone.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the blue sheet, about halfway up under modified open rule, we have SB 333. This simply provides for notice of foreclosure sales to go to all borrowers. Presently, the law limits it to those borrowers who have residences up for foreclosure. This will extend it to business and farm borrowers as well. Just notice of the foreclosure sale. Two above that is SB 117. Spoke briefly yesterday on. This is simply brings Georgia's bankruptcy exemptions for homesteads in line with the majority of states and the federal exemptions. Just above that is SB 107, which is requested by the Superior Court judges to adjust the level of fines for contempt. This has not been done in 30 years, so it's more of an inflation adjustment from $500 to $1,000. And one more under modified structure touched on yesterday is SB 101. This allows for students to have excused absences to work in an approved poll watching program. Thank you.
You got a question? Mr. Whip.
Yeah. Senator Stone, thank you for coming today. On Senate Bill 333, could you just give us a practical example of the sort of people that's going to be impacted by this?
Sure. Currently, the law directs notice to borrowers whose residences are being foreclosed. This would allow all borrowers who have property up for foreclosure sale under non-judicial foreclosure to receive notice of the sale so they can have an opportunity to be at the sale, bring people, other people to bid at the sale. It's more of a due process issue, and it corrects a problem that I've seen in my practice where borrowers aren't aware that their property is set to be sold until it's too late to do anything about it.
Any other questions? Thank you. If y'all don't mind, I've noticed that the distinguished gentleman from the Senate Rules has graced us with his presence, and I sure would like for him to be on the microphone next.
Hey, Mr. Chairman, I have a 15-minute presentation I'd like to present to you on Senate Bill 346, starting with Section 1.
Mr. Balfour, I think that's the gong show. You don't have to explain your bills to me. I'm sure they'll get on as soon as they can.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
And that is Semper Fi, by the way, not the Navy.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Hope.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Under the open rule section, I'd like to request H.R. 1644. It asks for a House-only study committee of our current statute governing the siting of power transmission lines and possible use of eminent domain. It also includes language about subsidiaries, because we need to make sure that the Georgia Transmission Corp., which is a subsidiary of the EMCs, is included in the purview.
Any questions, Mr. Hope? Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Miller.
Good to be back, Mr. Chairman.
You're next on the gong, friend.
I was wondering, do you want to ring it now, or should you want me to start, or you want to ring it now? No. First bill is Senate Bill 412. It's a cleanup bill. It delays the implementation of the DeKalb School Board from going from 9 to 7 members till 2015. We're in the process of working out the local legislation. We need this general bill in order to make this work. That's SB 412. I have two other, and it's in the modified structure on page 2. The other two bills also in the modified structure on page 2 come from the Education Finance Commission. First one is 403, and it deals with the state phasing in funding for the school nurse program, first year at 40%, and in 2 years up to 50%. We're putting $3.6 million in the 13 budget and about $10 million in the 15 budget, and the money has to be used for school nurses. The next bill is 404, which deals with professional development. It includes not only teachers, but it also includes administration. Good example is what they've done in Gwinnett County in their professional development for their principal program out there. And we'll be putting money in the budget in 2014 for that, about $7 million. I'm happy to answer any questions on any of the bills, sir.
Anybody got questions of the senator? I'm surprised somebody didn't ask you something. Or we might have been here all day. Maybe that's why they didn't. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I look forward to your golf tournament later on this year.
Mr. Goggins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I bring for your consideration, and it's on the top of the back page under Modified Structured Rule, Senate Bill 338, and it's the Georgia Volunteers in Dentistry and Dental Hygiene Act. And it just amends that bill to allow the Georgia Board to grant special license to dentists and hygienists from other states if they want to come in and volunteer their services to the charity clinics or special events that we have in Georgia.
Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Crosby.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Distinguished members of the committee, I would ask your consideration on three bills. On the first, on the blue page under Modified Open Rule, Senate Bill 351 and Senate Bill 352. Senate Bill 351 simply requires all judges exercising municipal court jurisdiction to receive some training, a mandatory training. As you well know, there are many titles to municipal courts around the state, mayor's court, recorder's court, so forth and so on. So that's just requiring all those people to get training. Under 352, it would authorize prosecuting attorneys in municipal courts. There is an amendment to that, which you have, I believe, and it's been agreed upon by GMA and everyone else involved. So we would ask your consideration for 351 and 352. And the third Senate bill is Senate Bill 441 on the back of the blue page, and that simply provides that it shall be a misdemeanor for anyone to point or project a laser device at a law enforcement officer or a airplane or helicopter.
Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm here today on behalf of Senate Bill 225 under modified structure, fourth bill down. This bill came to our attention out of a case that occurred in Hall County a few years ago. Individual claimed that he had murdered numerous people and buried them throughout South Georgia and North Florida, created a criminal offense for transmitting a false report. The second bill I'm here on behalf of is Senate Bill 361 on page 2, second bill down. And this deals with the Joint Commission of Accreditation of Hospitals. Senate Bill 361 will update the Georgia Code to comply with changes made with the federal level at the federal level for Centers of Medicare and Medicaid. If there are any questions, Mr. Chairman, I'd be glad to take them.
Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Underman.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, and I have to say I've never seen that dong before. Is that something new?
That's something special.
Oh, it is special. It really is special.
You're 15 seconds into it.
Okay, on the second page, we have Senate Bill 372, disposition of veterans' cremated remains. Unfortunately, there's many veterans who pass away and they do not have any family or loved ones to accept their cremains. These are bodies that have been cremated, and unfortunately, they sit on funeral home shelves and nobody claims them. There is a nationwide project and also a Georgia project called Missing in America, and these are nonprofit veterans organizations who go and accept these unknown cremains, and they bury them and give them a proper veterans burial. Also, I have Senate Bill 407. This is a Department of Community Health bill, cutting the red tape of the Health Strategies Council. This council was formed by legislation in 2008. It's never been appointed or done anything, and this does away with that code section.
Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Carter.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I bring before you today 3 bills. Under Modified Open Rule, Senate Bill 369 extends the Georgia Geospatial Council. This is a council that was set up a few years ago to help us with our FEMA mapping, just so that we can be consistent with the type of maps that we have in the state. It is a completely voluntary system, costs the state nothing at all, and we're just simply trying to extend it for 3 more years. Also, on the back page, under Modified Structure Rule, Senate Bill 416, this is the one that I presented yesterday that has to do with electronic prescription transmission and prior approvals. And then finally, under Structured Rule, Senate Bill 370 is our annual drug update. This is a very special bill this year because it does help with the spice epidemic that we are seeing in our communities, and certainly it is something that is very needed.
Any questions? Got Mr. Questions, Mr. Whip.
I'm sure that my friends over in the House of Lords know all the fancy words, but those of us in the House are more plain spoken. Could you define geospatial for us?
Geospatial. Geospatial is it comes from the Latin root of space, and it has to do with mapping.
Okay. Where does geo come from?
Yeah, it's a combination.
Space.
Pardon me?
You got space.
Spatial. Yes, sir.
Geo.
Geo. If you remember back to your Latin, yes, sir.
Bye. John, I'm sorry. Johnny, your turn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I only have one bill to bring for you this morning. It's on the back page, Senate Bill 366. This is for the Juvenile Justice Department and defines contraband and helps us to keep the folks that we keep locked up in the juvenile justice facilities and also the employees of Juvenile Justice Department safe by controlling unwanted material behind our guard lines. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Transportation himself, Mr. Mullis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I can't think of a better way to start a day off with a cup of Huddle House coffee and a visit to the House Rules Committee. Anyway.
It's taken me a year. Let's don't throw me in the fire yet.
This is under Modified Structured Rules, Senate Bill 492. And yesterday you mentioned that you thought there's some concern about the bill, but all that's been worked out by the Department of Administrative Services. I'd like to thank the Chairman of Judiciary, Wendell Willard, for his work on this too, and of course Representative Henry too for his help. But this is regarding heavy equipment, and it expands the bid process so more can be included on helping the taxpayers get the best deal when it comes to state contracts and bids, and also make sure that the bottom line is always adhered to regardless of any special treatment would not be awarded in those regards. Be glad to answer any questions or I'll get out of here.
Ms. Abrams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Mullis, looking at the bill, they've substituted in Section 1, Code Section 3691-21, which is not in the same title or section and has no direct reference to the underlying bill. Can you speak to how this Section 1 came to be in the bill and how it relates to the underlying legislation?
Well, because we're talking about bid process, so the topic is germane, so to speak. I know the Germans had nothing to do with this, but we believe that the topic was the same, I guess, I can't think of a word for it, but help me out here. The topic is the same. We're talking about bid process, and of course,
If I can ask a follow-up question?
same subject matter. That's exactly what I was trying to say. Thank you.
Given that it's the same subject matter, would it not be appropriate for Section 1 to be limited only to the Department of Administrative Services, because Section 2 and Section 3 only address DAS. This code section only addresses DAS.
Well,
that title, but Section 1 actually has broader implications for local government.
Well, Madam Leader, I appreciate your concern, but this building is full of lawyers, and the ones I've dealt with said this is perfectly acceptable, and so it seemed to pass through all the committees in that regard too, even the blessing of the chairman of Judiciary. So we feel that the subject matter is what is acceptable in pursuing our achievement here in this bill.
Thank you, Mr. Mullis.
Thank you. Let me know how the Transportation Committee and Senate can be of service to you.
I will. Mr. Bullock, you gonna come every day?
Mr. Chairman, I just enjoy coming before the House Rules Committee so much. I've come back today asking you about SB 367, which is the Department of Ag bill that would give them the ability to require surety bonds when they're dealing with civil penalties. Be glad to answer any question.
We can't ask you anything. You've been here too many times. You know the answers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Schaefer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just here to ask again for Senate Bill 385, which is the Insurance Department's annual housekeeping bill. It passed out of the Senate unanimously and out of your Insurance Committee unanimously, and hope you'll move it forward at the appropriate time.
Any questions? Thank you. Y'all listen up. We're going to set the calendar for tomorrow. Again, today, you might just be on your toes because you know we're starting with a very small calendar that will have a couple of things on it, and then we might be back in here. Everybody understand? All right. Setting the calendar for tomorrow. First on your list, number 56 in your heart, under structured rule, SB 346.
Move.
Any opposition? It's on. Under structured rule, SB 370.
Move.
Any opposition? It's under modified structure, SB 492.
Move.
Have an objection. All those in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Caroline, you okay? Just want to make sure you got to vote. Under structured rule, SB 430. Do you hear a move?
Move.
Remember that was the one Mr. Bethel brought that's on the yellow sheet. We're moving it over to structured. But I've got to move. Do I have any objection? It's on. Under modified structure, SB 101.
Move.
Any objection? Under modified structure, SB 110. Any objection? And under modified open, House Resolution 1368. 1367, excuse me. Any objection? All those in favor signify by aye. Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it, it's on. All right, that'll be the start for Wednesday.